Just a few housekeeping issues. We are recording these and we are going to continue moving on with our spring conference series again next week. We have Dr. Goddard returning again to discuss some infectious disease and infection control topics with COVID-19. So for those of you who have joined us throughout the series, please continue to spend your Thursday evenings with us. We look forward to that too. So it's my pleasure without further ado, to introduce Dr. Gretchen Pianka. Gretchen has done some amazing work and launched Resilience University within her Lewiston, Maine practice. Her initiative has garnered national interest and will soon be featured on the AAP STAR Resource Center. As a member of the Tufts Hope Health Outcomes from Positive Experience Innovation Network, she is bringing to clinical practice the cutting-edge research showing the powerful protective effect of positive childhood experiences and the offsetting power of the effect of adverse childhood, offsetting effect on adverse childhood experiences. Her hope is to offer Resilience University broadly as the mental health equivalent of putting fluoride in the water for dental health. Dr. Pianka attended the University of Vermont School of Medicine and got an MPH from the University of New England. She has won multiple awards and has worked for years as the physician champion from the First Tooth program. Dr. Pianka currently works with the Maine AAP on the Social Determinants of Health ASHU Collaborative, and she is a fellow of the American Academy of Pediatrics and the managing physician at Central Maine Pediatrics. She precepts family medicine residents and teaches University of New England medical students at Central Maine Medical Center. Thank you, Dr. Pianka, for joining us this evening. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Deb. I appreciate the nice introduction. And so I am coming to this role of talking about how we can help youth with their feelings and challenging experiences, partly because of this program that I've been doing in my practice. So I started back in July of 2020 doing what I affectionately refer to as Resilience University, which was modeled after the Potty University that we used to have in Portland, thinking that it would be nice to be able to work with families on ways to foster resilience, kind of one messy moment at a time. Over the last few months, I've had a little over 40 families working through this program. About half of them are finished. The data is kind of exciting, and hopefully I'll be able to present that at some point. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm very interested in integrating how we bring evidence-based resilience building strategies into our existing encounters with families. One of the most powerful things I found for parents during COVID is to just simply acknowledge that it's okay that things are not okay. So kind of to say that we're all in this together, and that I'm here to help you and support you in any way that I can. And I like to think of it as essentially kind of giving a resilience prescription along with everything else that we're doing. So you're doing the normal things that you would do at a regular visit, and then you're also kind of offering this, well, is there anything else we can do to help strengthen your family kind of from the inside out and foster resilience based on what we know from the positive childhood experiences and other stress buffering factors that have been studied. So to start with for this evening, I was thinking it might help to just rewind a little bit and to go back to kind of where we were when we started COVID, because we were starting to get a little bit worried about how we were doing in Maine when it came to mental health. We had just seen this study, which many of you are probably familiar with. That's this 2016 National Survey of Children's Health Data, which was a parent proxy survey of children 0 to 17. And we ranked highest at 27.2%, with Maine showing that that we are kind of winning when it comes to the number of children having a mental health diagnosis. And unfortunately, about half of those children were not receiving care for their mental health diagnosis before we started having a pandemic. So again, kind of pre-COVID, 1 in 4 children in Maine had at least one mental health disorder. And these are things like depression, anxiety, or ADHD. And again, we are above the national average, which is more like 1 in 6. We also have the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey data, which showed us that suicide rates were increasing and above the national average. 1 in 6 of our Maine high school students had considered suicide, which by my math is about 13,000 young people, which is terrifying to me. And 7,200 Maine adolescents had attempted suicide in the last year based on that same 2019 survey. So this is again going into a pandemic, and 45% or more of our teens had vaped, tried marijuana, and drank alcohol in the last 30 days. So some of this, is just historical at this point, and I don't have all the longitudinal data of where we've ended up during COVID. There's some people who've done little studies here and there, but I think it suffice it to say our children, especially our teens, were struggling as we entered into the pandemic. And so it's really important that we try to build resilience and help them whenever we are interacting with them. So this is, again, probably stuff that most of you have seen. So this is 1 in 5 of our Maine high school students had 4 or more ACEs. And as we all know, the more ACEs or adverse childhood experiences that you have, the more likely you are to engage in risky behaviors, the higher your chances of having depression as you get older. So we had quite a few high school students having 4 or more ACEs, again, going into the pandemic. And we're not alone. So the US globally is not really rocking it out of the park when it comes to mental well-being in our children. So this is a UNICEF data from pre-pandemic, and we were ranked 32 out of 38 for children's mental well-being, which is not just the absence of a mental health diagnosis, but it includes a lot of other factors that look at how well our children are feeling from a mental health standpoint. So we weren't alone, but then this happened. And like I do, you've probably looked at this quite a lot over the last year. So this is our Maine CDC website. And as you know, our rates of positivity are rising a little bit. And although we have a lot of vaccinations and we are hopeful that we are seeing a turn of events, I don't think we're quite out of the woods when it comes to the struggles that our youth are going to be facing. So I think it's really important that we keep that in mind as we move forward through, hopefully, this kind of exit period from COVID. So just our acuity was pretty high going into the pandemic, and children are having a really hard time with remote learning, all of these things. Hopefully we'll be getting kids back more into in-person school, but even that is going to pose its own challenges. I know I was talking to one mother today who was just talking about how hard it is to get her teenage daughter up in the morning and dressed and out of the house, that she's so used to being in her bed and just rolling over and pulling the computer over. She just hasn't gotten dressed or out of bed in quite some time, more than just to go to the bathroom or down to the kitchen. So we are going to have another whole set of struggles as we start trying to welcome children back into the classroom and get things kind of back to quote unquote normal. So this presentation will just kind of go over some of those strategies, some of the evidence-based strategies that we can use to try to help support families as we anticipate that there may be even more stress and new challenges that we're going to face as we go through the next few months. So this is a way of looking at what's happening with the pandemic, which I just kind of appreciate. So we started with the physical health crisis. We then developed an economic crisis, and this is all leading to a rather large mental health crisis. Thinking of it this way helps me to then segue into, where the kids fit into this. So the economic stressors are affecting the parents, and then the parents' mental health. And then this is from the Center for Translational Neuroscience out in Oregon. And I like the way they look at this. So kind of the material hardship makes the caregiver stressed, and then the caregiver stress leads to child distress. So this data comes from families with children who are 0 to 5, so little ones. But if you haven't looked at this, it's some wonderful data. They've been doing regular surveys of families with small children with the intent to understand what factors are impacting early childhood development during the pandemic. So looking at it kind of this way and thinking that, so the same study is showing that 68% of caregivers are feeling really stressed, so having an increase in stress. And then 33% of children are being seen as being more fussy, disobedient, naughty. So is that really true? Are the kids really having a hard time with their behavior problems, or are our stressed parents just not able to manage everything that's going on? So their plates are full, spilling over. Um, and the way they present this is sort of as though it's a chain reaction. So you start with the financial stress, and then you get the caregiver stress, and then the children are stressed. So, as we know, because we work with families, sometimes the kids are kind of at the end of the chain reaction. And then, as pediatricians, these parents are bringing these kids to us saying, well, Johnny's misbehaving. What do I do? So, we'll get to that kind of how to help in this situation when you know that this is the background and this is what's happening, and you know that the families are stressed. So the Oregon studies are looking mostly at the children, families with children who are 0 to 5. But as we all probably know, across the world, there are a lot of studies that have been looking at what has happened with mental health during the pandemic. And this is a multinational review looking at different countries, and basically prevalence of all forms of depression, anxiety, stress, sleep problems, and psychological distress in general is rising. So we know this. Those of us who are working with families daily, we've seen this, we know this. So it's not just the families with small children, but it's pretty much everybody. Everyone's feeling stressed. It's not just a US thing, and we are all pretty much spread very thin with our mental health services, at least in Maine. So other areas may be doing better than this, but we did not have very many counselors who would take main care patients going into COVID. By what I could find in 2019, probably close to half of our 6 to 18-year-olds were covered by main care, but less than 25% of counselors in some of our more populated counties took main care. So even if you wanted to get a counselor, sometimes it's hard. A lot of the counselors closed to new patients when COVID happened, and many of them are only doing virtual, which is often really hard if you're trying to establish a relationship with a new mental health provider and you've never seen them in person. It can be quite a challenge on both sides, both for the family to feel safe and like they can talk openly, and then for the counselor to understand what's going on in the household. And just in my own little world over in Lewiston, we rely very heavily on CCS psychiatry for our mental health referrals when we need help with a psychiatrist for children who are struggling with mental health issues. And pre-COVID, they were getting approximately 60 referrals a week. Now they're getting over 100. So they have had to limit their access geographically to their services, which makes it even harder for us as primary care providers to get help when we identify. So we can identify the family that's struggling. We can say this child has a really, terrifying, suicidal ideation and depression, but we have a really hard time getting help with that. So this is a reality for us as providers. Is just, I think a lot of us in primary care are feeling like this, are kind of squished, kind of sandwiched. So we're trying the best we can, but it's really hard for families, and it's also really hard for the people we would normally like to refer to. So our teens, especially, but all of our kids are kind of struggling. They've had it. And the pandemic has a little ways to go before we get back to where things are a little bit easier. I had a provider in my office the other day who was literally in tears, saying that she has never felt like this before. She has so many families who need so many things, and she feels like she just can't give them what they need. And so I think a lot of us are feeling like that. Children are feeling like this, and we are feeling stressed. So what can we do, and how can we help? How can we help to identify and address these big issues that our teens and their families are experiencing? So if you haven't looked at this, this is the AAP's Resilience Project website, which is wonderful. Their goal is to help stop toxic stress, which I think is an exciting goal, by increasing protective factors, kind of knowing that life is going to be hard, things are going to be challenging. And what we want to do is, kind of like I said with the Resilience University thing, strengthen the families from the inside out so they are more resilient when they are meeting these stressors. So increasing protective factors, including parental resilience, social connections, the ability to get concrete help in times of need, parent knowledge of child development, and social and emotional competence for children. So these are wonderful things that we can offer, but there's sort of a part of it, for me at least, that has always been, well, that sounds great, but how do we actually do that? What does that look like? And how do I do that in my practice? So they even have these wonderful posters, which I think are great. And as a primary care pediatrician, I don't think there's anything I want to give my families and their children more than a healthy adulthood and a healthy life, and to make the stress of their childhood go away. Um, but I love these posters, but I don't know how we actually do this. Like, how do you do this? You can put the poster in your room, but like, what do you do to actually help that family whose parents have perhaps lost their job? They're suffering from economic hardship. The parents are super stressed. The kids are misbehaving. The teenager may be vaping, maybe failing school. Like, how do you actually help? So it sounds good in theory, but how on earth can we translate this into what we're already doing, which of course also involves all the things that we already do when we're interfacing with families. So it can be a challenge to pack anything new into those encounters. So just a little history too. This isn't just something that came up yesterday, and this is not just like a COVID response. People have been trying to figure out how to reduce toxic stress and bring pediatricians to the table with this for years. So this is from 2013 from Harvard Center for the Developing Child. And it's a wonderful little piece talking about how excited they were about this new AAP initiative to address toxic stress and promote resilience. So we're 8 years later, and we're still having a hard time doing this. So we need this more than ever. And even way back then, one of the people who was mentioned in this article, so it was Dr. Weitzman, she's the director of developmental behavioral pediatrics at Yale, said that the science is pretty compelling. It's pretty clear. So there needs to be a bridge between what we know and what we do. So basically, we have the science. We know how to help families reduce the long-term impact of toxic stress. But what we're having a hard time doing is figuring out how to actually bridge that into our day-to-day experience. So it's not that it's something that is out there that we haven't studied. We have all kinds of evidence-based things that we can do to help, but it's how do we actually integrate it? So it's exciting. And as she pointed out here, it's very slow, but very exciting. So 8 years later, we have the science. We just need to start to integrate this into our day-to-day activities. So when you don't know what to do, a good place to look for guidance is sunny California and the most amazing Nadine Burke Harris, who is their incredible pediatric surgeon general. So if you ever need any inspiration, just look at something she's said or done, and usually it makes you feel better because she's just incredible. So this is from a New York Times piece that she did just last month in March, talking about how COVID and trauma will shape the lives of our young people going forward. And what I like about this quote, I put the whole thing there just because it felt bad to like trim it, just because it's so amazing and it's completeness, but that it's critically important that we all help. So what she's emphasizing is that what our children need is cumulative doses of buffering from everybody. So educators, law enforcement, judges, early child care workers, the guy at the grocery store, we all need to be part of helping to support this building resilience for our kids. So the fluoride in the water approach, it needs to be everywhere, coming from everyone. This isn't just something where we're going to refer to one place and they're going to meet with one person, and that one person is going to have the job of helping the family become more resilient. We all need to do it. So we all need to start feeling comfortable about working with families who are going through really challenging times, because as we know, we are kind of all doing that right now, just in different ways. And again, how though, right? So this sounds good, but how do we actually do it? What does this look like when you're interfacing with a family? So this is a slide from the presentation that she did when they were introducing that roadmap for resilience. So basically, these are evidence-based stress busters, and I'm not going to go into all the articles behind all the pieces of all the pies here, but you probably, can just basically get on a Gestalt level why all of these things are so important, and they all relate to lowering stress. And if you want to, you can look at the article that this diagram came from. But as Dr. Weitzman said years ago, the science is clear. What we need is a bridge. So how do we bring this beautiful stuff into our encounters with children and families and help them to actually access these stress busters in the middle of feeling stressed? So we also know from the positive childhood experience literature that positive childhood experiences mitigate the long-term mental health effects of adverse childhood experiences. So again, this is really powerful stuff. And a lot of our kids, like I showed you earlier, in Maine have more than 4. So a lot of our kids are at the yellow line with the highest number of ACEs. And so the more positive childhood experiences they have, the less impact those ACEs are going to have on their mental health long term. So this is really great. And how do we actually help families do this? Like, how do we help to cultivate these positive childhood experiences? Because if we can't offer something like that, then really what we're doing is just making another list of things that kids are supposed to have. So we have a list of ACEs that they're not supposed to have, and now we have a list of PCEs that they're supposed to have. And, we're just kind of creating a new list of things that if you got it, great. If you don't, whoops. So what are these positive childhood experiences? So the way I kind of see it is sort of these top 2 pieces of Dr. Harris's pie here, the mental health and supportive relationships. So positive childhood experiences, the questions from that study that showed the impact on long-term mental health asked the respondents, were you able to talk about your feelings with your family? Did you feel like your family stood by you during difficult times? Did you enjoy participating in community traditions, feel a sense of belonging in high school, feel supported by friends, have at least 2 non-parent adults who took a genuine interest in you, and feel safe and protected by an adult in your home? So on one level, these seem really relatively mundane. These are a lot of things that we do or our families do or we might experience. A lot of teens take their friends for granted. A lot of times we have a coach or somebody from church or somebody who has always been there for our child. So some of these seem quite mundane, but it's really exciting to think about the powerful long-term protective buffering effect they have on adversity and childhood stress. So, but then you go into where we are now. So COVID. So when you look at COVID and you think about the positive childhood experiences with what has happened in the last year, we have been isolated. We have largely not been able to enjoy participating in community traditions. We haven't even been able to go to high school. Many people aren't able to see their friends. And if you had a non-parent adult who was really interested in your life, they may have become a very remote person. So they may no longer have that same impact in your day-to-day experience that they did before COVID. So that's like half the list, right? And then the other half of the list are the things that were happening in the home. So feeling able to talk about your feelings, feeling like your family's standing by you, and feeling safe and protected by an adult in the home. So again, I bring back the slide that I showed you before from the Center for Translational Neuroscience. And if we have almost 70% of parents feeling super stressed, how easy is it going to be for those stressed parents to really be able to hold space for their child's unpleasant feelings and to stand by each other when things are hard? They are not feeling good. So when they get home from their day or whatever's going on, or they're sitting at the dining room table doing Zoom work all day and next to their child who's doing Zoom school all day, are they actually able to talk about feelings and feel like they're supporting each other? Or are they just driving each other crazy because everybody is so stressed? So when you're stressed, your bandwidth for listening to other people's issues shrinks. So depending on how everybody's doing, my guess is that this has been a real challenge for families during COVID, just across the board, because we're all kind of smushed in together like sardines. So how can we help? So as we hopefully start to get ready to segue out of what we've been going through for the last year, and again, I don't want to jinx anything, so knock on wood that this will actually start to shift in some way. How can we help to foster as many of these evidence-based stress busting protective factors in the kids that we interface with as possible? So the way that I've been doing it with my Resilience University, and what I find just really inviting, and it works really well with families, is to use the messy moments to start this conversation. So we use the encounters where we're talking about something really unpleasant. So this kind of list I've put here on the side. So anything from refusing to go to school, to cutting, to starting to vape, to not listening, to misbehaving, fighting, arguing, all these unpleasant things that families bring to us. So we can use these unpleasant moments to look past what they're actually doing and to start figuring out how they're feeling, and then start trying to help integrate those stress busting protective factors into the family culture. So starting with the it's okay that things aren't okay really helps to open this conversation, because a lot of times families are like, he's doing this, he's doing that, he's doing this, and like to just pause and be like, so everything is really hard. It sounds like everything's hard for you and for him. And let's talk about what's hard, and let's try to figure out some ways that you can take care of each other and take care of yourselves as you go through these hard times. So one of the things that has helped open these conversations with families is to say, I want you to kind of back the bus up and look beyond the behavior. So the behavior is a cry for help with something else that's going on. So thinking about, is there something else going on when my child is misbehaving, which a lot of families have never even conceived of. So he is misbehaving because he woke up this morning and he decided to ruin my day. And that is the problem. And so he needs to stop misbehaving. But when you can show the parent that there actually might be something going on, maybe he's missing his grandmother, maybe he's missing his friends, maybe he's feeling really sad that he can't do sports, or something else is going on. Maybe, who knows what it is? He's not feeling good. Maybe he's just tired or hungry or cold, but he's not feeling good. So, what's going on that's leading to the behavior? So, encouraging families to lean in and be curious. And then what I do is I kind of model that. So I was like, wow, that sounds really messy. Like, what else is going on? Being careful to help the parents not just jump to punishment, because if Joey wakes up in the morning and he's being a complete disaster and you think that he's out to ruin your day, but actually he's feeling really sad or really anxious or really worried, or he didn't sleep well, if you just start punishing him, you never address that feeling. So when Joey then becomes a 40-something-year-old person, he's not going to check off the box that I was able to talk about my feelings with my family. And I didn't feel supported because he didn't feel supported. He just felt punished. So trying to help the family focus on, okay, what's the feeling behind the behavior? What might have led to this moment that you don't like? How can we kind of back things up a little bit and be curious? And then how can we go back to the, what would Nadine do? What could possibly be leading to this? And how can we support the family in building resilience rather than just punishing or focusing on the behavior? So as I said before, I think we have to be really careful to not just come up with a new list of things that kids are supposed to have. So, like we have this list of adverse childhood experiences, the more of those you have, the less healthy you're going to be long term. Now we have a list of positive childhood experiences. The more you have of those, the healthier you're going to be. So, we have to be just really careful when we're working with families and when you're thinking about this. A lot of times in my experience, we're kind of asked when we're interfacing with families to screen for things and to make lists and to check off how many of these things they have or don't have. And then if they have a lot, they need a referral, or maybe they have a lot of these, they don't need a referral. But just being careful, this is more than just about lists. This is actually about having us become part of the solution. So making sure that we are becoming part of that community-wide solution that Nadine talked about in that quote that I read earlier, so that we're all offering this interdisciplinary buffering for the families and for their children. So protective factors are actually within reach of everybody. They might need some support. Some people might need a little more support than others, but they can still be going through adversity. We don't have to get rid of the adversity to allow for the protective factors to have space. So I like to think of something, this is something you can do anytime. So no matter what's going on, there's not like a specific situation where you wouldn't do this. Anytime that a family's having a hard time, just acknowledging that it's okay that things are hard. I'm right here with you, and I'm going to try to help you figure out how things could be a little less hard. Even if all you're doing is making it less hard to get out of the house and to get Joey's shoes on in the morning so that he can get to preschool on time, you're going to make things a little bit easier, one tiny little step at a time. So I think of it as a two-step approach. So the first step is to do what I was just mentioning. So kind of look beyond the behavior at what is happening. So how is that child feeling? A lot of our teens and children don't have the same distractions that they have had in the past. So some of their strategies for self-care when they're not feeling good may be totally out of reach. So something, a lot of our athletes used to, be at sports practice, be communicating with their team members, their coaches, and those things kept them from ever noticing their big unpleasant feelings. And so they never really felt challenged by them. But now maybe they don't have sports, or sports is limited or canceled briefly because somebody had COVID, or they got sent home because they had an exposure. So there's a lot of new challenges there. So instead of relying on their old ways of taking care of themselves, it helps to give them some new ideas. So remembering that each unpleasant feeling is temporary, it's going to come and go. I know things are hard right now and you would really love to be back in football practice, but for right now you can't. And then how can you take care of yourself while you're having this yucky feeling? It's not going to last forever. And then most importantly perhaps is our interface with the family. So sometimes when you have a family or a child coming to you and they're in some varying level of distress, so they're having a hard time, they may not be very pleasant to interact with. So sometimes, you walk into a room with a parent and a teenager and they're yelling, or the teenager's really angry, or something's going on. Just notice if that brings something up in you. And your job is to also take care of yourself while that big feeling is there, because you can't really help the family through it unless you can do it as well. So notice that if you're having a stress day, or maybe you're having a really hard time with something that's going on. I mean, I know in my practice, a lot of things have changed. Our administration has turned over, like all kinds of stuff is changing, and it can be really stressful. So making sure that you're taking care of yourself. So when you bring your being to these families, you can come with that resilient support system and connect everybody with what you actually want to be bringing into the room, and not just adding more stress to the situation. So then the second step is to try to help encourage healthy coping strategies. So we're really good at things like hungry, tired, and cold. We know what to do with those, right? That's not hard. But if somebody's angry or lonely or frustrated or irritated, what do they do? And how do we help them? So kind of thinking through those things, what are some of the things from this lovely little wheel from Dr. Harris's presentation that we can encourage the kids and the families to access? So what kinds of things may help when you're feeling frustrated or annoyed? So you're sitting there at the dining room table and you're doing your math, and your little sister keeps coming up to you and wants you to go outside and play, and you can't go outside and play. You have to finish your math. What can you do to take care of yourself so you don't scream at your little sister, throw something across the room, then get in trouble, and you go on from there? So how do you help the families tee themselves up for success despite all the adversity and stress that they're going through, so that they can come out the other side of all of this more resilient and using these messy moments to actually learn new skills and to become stronger? So a lot of schools have started doing this kind of approach with children, through the Castle, and then also through Mark Brackett's ruler approach. So and I don't think many of the main schools are using either one of those, but there's a lot of these social emotional learning curriculums that the schools are working on, and a lot of them are taking into account that kind of modern neuroscience approach, so that knowing that kids can't learn very well when they're really stressed. So trying to help the kids find a self-care strategy that will lower their stress level, so that prefrontal cortex can come back online and they can get back to math. So this is an example of a a school-based initiative to build resilience in students. And the way this teacher is doing it is she had the students identify their stressors, then identify what they normally did when presented with a stressor, and then brainstorm alternate ways of responding to that stressor, and then trying to do some practical application of healthy coping skills. Some of the key points she pointed out are that these coping skills need to be flexible and fluid, and you can't get caught up in, I always have to do this when X, Y, or Z happens. So again, if we let's think about the teen sitting at the dining room table trying to do their math, and the little sister. If what always happens is the little sister tries to get the older sibling's attention, and then it turns into a fight, how can that teen manage that stressor in a different way? What is an alternate way to respond to your little sister when she wants your attention and you're feeling stressed about math? What else could you do? Could you ask mom for help? Could you listen to music? Could you take a break from math and go for a walk? Could you actually take a break and go play with your little sister for 2 minutes and come back to math? But problem solving with the families and trying to figure out, well, okay, so this is a hard moment. How can we approach this differently in a more fluid and flexible way? So my experience doing this with families is they absolutely love the help. So they absolutely love to have these dialogues, and they really, nobody's enjoying these messy moments. They would never bring it to you if you didn't ask them what was hard. So feeling like it's okay to ask what's hard because you're going to have an idea about how to help make things a little bit less hard is a helpful place to start. All right, let's see if I can get to the next slide. So this, again, just kind of going back to the AAP. So the AAP has made some wonderful recommendations during COVID to try to help people who work with families, support families, and build resilience through COVID. One of the things they recommend, kind of in the middle of this slide here, is practicing techniques together, such as mindfulness, relaxation, and focusing on the present moment. So helping families build coping strategies to deal with uncomfortable and frightening feelings. So this is wonderful. And again, I go back to that, well, okay, but how do we actually do this? Because for a lot of families, they've never actually had to do this in a real way before. So when things get hard, people get sent to their rooms or something else happens. But we are being kind of asked with COVID and with the amount of time we're spending together in our homes, that a lot of these families are being asked to deal with unpleasant feelings without a lot of external support, without being able to go to the usual people they go to for help. And sometimes that's pretty messy. So leaning in to be curious about, what does it look like when you actually try to support each other? What does it look like when things are getting hard? What kinds of situations are challenging for you guys? And then trying to identify what they're doing. Like, how do you handle this? Some families have great strategies. Like, I was talking with a teenager the other day who had this whole system for when her little brother was bothering her and she would go for a walk, and she had a strategy. She'd already figured it out that she couldn't stay in her room because he would always drive her bananas. So she would get her phone and go for a walk. Well, then that fell apart when she got in trouble and the parents took away the phone, and then she couldn't have her coping strategy. So we had that whole discussion. But a lot of kids have already figured out something that they can do when one of these unpleasant situations arises. So this is sort of how I approach the conversation with kids, is to say, let's come up with 10 different things you can do in that moment where you don't feel good. So just in case you've lost your phone, you still have 3 or 4 other things that you can do. Depending on the age of the child you're talking to, the scenario, the situation, whatever it is, it can be all kinds of different things. Headspace and Calm are really nice ones for teenagers. They'll sometimes use those when they won't use anything else. So, and then talking with the parents too, just like my previous example, and reminding parents that sometimes taking away the electronics actually removes one of the most accessible coping strategies that the kids have. So, especially with teens, if talking to your friends or doing Headspace or listening to music is one of your coping strategies, just being mindful of that. It may not be the best coping strategy in that situation, but if it is a coping strategy and they don't have very many other ones, trying to build on the strengths that they've already identified and celebrate what the child already knows how to do. So again, sometimes they know how to take care of themselves, and we just have to support the family to not undermine the kids when they're trying to do one of their emerging self-care skills. So I also think it's important, just as people who interface with families, that we need to do this ourselves. So if we're trying to teach somebody something we don't really know how to do, it doesn't go as well. So remembering that when we're stressed and when our prefrontal cortex is not online, we are not thinking very clearly either. So if you're going into a room or talking with a family in a difficult situation, or somehow interfacing with a family that's struggling, and you start noticing yourself feeling stressed and anxious, frustrated, irritated, annoyed, like you want to be somewhere else, remember to take care of yourself. So that kind of see one, do one, teach one approach. Remember, you are also, your job is to take care of yourself while that big feeling is there. Do 5 big deep breaths, do a little bit of whatever mindfulness meditation practice you do, whatever helps you feel better. Take a minute, take care of yourself, and then your prefrontal cortex can come back online and you can help the family that you're trying to help. If you just try to push through it, you often can't offer the same level of depth when it comes to talking about resilience because you're not feeling terribly resilient yourself. So reminding parents and kids the same thing too, that parents often think when the kid is really stressed, it doesn't matter. He just needs to finish his math. So this week, one of the families I worked with was a mom who's extremely anxious about the fact that her daughter is failing a lot of her classes. And so she has gotten progressively stricter and stricter and stricter about making sure that her daughter sits there at the computer until her assignments are done. So this has become really messy and ugly. And the mom is yelling at the daughter. The daughter is feeling stressed. She's often crying. She's trying to do her math, but she can't think straight because she's in this total stress state. And the mom is also in a stress state, just her own version of that. So mom's thinking, if I don't get you to do your math, you're going to be ruined for life. It's my job to get you to do your math. So mom's anxiety is going up and up and up and up and up. And the girl's anxiety is going up and up and up and up and up. And nobody's prefrontal cortex is online. You've just got two amygdalas kind of screaming at each other, and the math is not happening. So they just needed permission to just take a break. And as soon as I told them, look, in that situation, the math is not happening, and that's okay. It's okay for things to not be okay. And it's okay to take a break. And mom needed permission to know that she wasn't being a bad mom and she wasn't going to ruin her daughter for life if she let her take a break and not finish math right then and there, but to take care of herself first. So that can be a really powerful little offering. So just in summary, the way I approach this kind of recognizing and addressing feelings is to try to look past the behaviors that you're seeing to whatever emotions or feelings are coming up underneath those. And then helping the family to address the stress level, which we know is there, with evidence-based buffering strategies. So most of the ones I use are meditation, mindfulness, breathing exercises, singing, those other ones, going outside, nature, exercise. So going back to Nadine's little wheel, and starting the conversation with something that, sometimes might feel a little bit awkward to say, but what is hard? So if you can tell that they're having a challenging time, what is hard? Tell me one of the scenarios that's particularly difficult. And then that gives you a little window into what life looks like. And then you can use that messy moment to say, well, okay, so what if instead of insisting that everybody sit at the table and finish their math, you took a break and everybody did a walk first and then came back and tried math again when their brains were feeling more functional. So in the end, my approach to this is what would Nadine do? WWND. So if you have any questions, let me know. But that is my approach to helping youth with challenges and their emotions.
Wow, Gretchen, thank you. That was, again, really inspiring. And I'm going to just double check my chat and I do have a quick question. Will you just talk about sort of the cumulative effects of some of the things that you are talking about, meaning that like there's clear benefit to setting up a consistent practice of some of these stress busters?
Right. So I think, the way I talk about it with families is that you wouldn't just expect yourself to go out and be able to play soccer in the Olympics. You would start with doing drills in the backyard. So you've got to start somewhere. So having families just start with the idea of trying to integrate some sort of one of those things from that, from Dr. Harris's, pie chart there, one or two of those things. Just start trying to think about something. And oftentimes families are already doing a lot of these things. Like when you talk to families who have small children, they're already using singing time to help transition when things are hard. Or families with older children, they're already using go outside and run around before we sit down and do, the next assignment or something. They're already using these strategies, but they're just not seeing it that way. So kind of highlighting it and being like, you already do this. You're already using a strategy that's really important and helps to buffer stress and help to build resilience. So just highlighting that when you're talking to the families and then saying, so this is a process. So you learn one skill and then you add it and then you practice and you're going to find yourself, whoops, we're over where we used to be. And then you come back through the woods and try to get back on the path you intended to be on. So it's a process. It's a slow process for some families. Other families, I feel like they just take off. And as soon as they get the idea, they're like, at the Olympics of whatever this is, this sport of resilience. So, I think it depends on the families. I think a lot of the families who have already some sort of inkling about, they've read something about emotional intelligence, or they've read some, they kind of know something, they're like, oh, I get that, and it makes a lot of sense. And helping the families too, that kind of old Gottman approach of emotion coaching parents. So teaching the parents that this is actually part of your job, is to help coach your kids in their feelings. So you want them to be a good soccer player, coach them in soccer in the backyard. You want them to be a healthy human when they grow up, when it comes to emotions and feelings, then you got to coach them. You got to help them, tell them when they're completely out in left field and help them come back. So,
Hey, Gretchen, I have a question about, you mentioned that some of your families had graduated.
yes.
Like, what does a family have to do to graduate?
So not very much. They do 4 30-minute sessions with me over whatever period of time it ends up being. Some of them have gotten quarantined in the middle and it's been months. Others, they've come in 1 week after the other. And so I do it just based on 4 sessions and time. And I teach them a couple different mindfulness techniques, basic meditation. I do the kind of trauma-informed positive parenting approach. And then that whole idea of backing the bus up, like, whoa, okay, stop focusing on behavior. What else is going on here? And, it's like a very simple little curriculum. And then I do PDSA cycles. So with the other sessions, I have them come back and be like, well, what was hard? What was easy? What went well? What didn't? And then we do kind of another little PDSA cycle around, okay, so, well, Johnny's doing really well. He stopped biting his friend, but now he won't go to sleep. And then we come up with a new strategy around whatever they're identifying as the next concern. So, and then I do little t-shirts and certificates and I say, we are graduated. But so far the data is kind of exciting. It's definitely somewhere between like 18 and 50% even in a reduction in the pediatric symptom checklist scores. So I need to finish collecting it, but it's looking.
I had 2 more questions. One was about, do you feel like you can identify before you like undertake this which families are going to be successful, or are you like totally shocked? And then the other thing is, if nobody else has a question, I was hoping you could sort of share your ideas about the teen resilience university.
Yeah, no, I've been totally surprised. I have been completely blindsided by families where, like, because I get referrals from my other the other providers in my practice. So these aren't all my patients. Some of them I don't know at all. And sometimes they'll kind of come to me and apologize and be like, I'm sorry, they've already seen counseling and they can't get into CCS and I don't know what else to do. Can you work with them? And I'm like, sure. And then, like, these little 8-year-olds are like rock stars, like learning how to do their breathing, and like it's completely surprising. So I haven't yet had that sense where I feel like, and then I've had some families where I feel like they're kind of coming to me because somebody's getting divorced and they kind of know theoretically, like, maybe this might hurt the kids, so let's do everything we can. And almost like they don't need it or don't want it. And then at the end, we end up talking about all this stuff and they're like, oh my God, this was so helpful. I'm like, oh, well, good. But like, they looked all shiny on the outside, like nothing was going on. So I've had all comers. It's been really quite fascinating. The teen resilience stuff is worries me, because I think we've got a different equation when we're competing with pot and cutting and thinking about, well, I'm just going to end my life because this is too hard, versus the little kids who are still in the space where they're like, well, I can try what mommy says and I can cuddle my dog, and I haven't started thinking about using mind altering substances yet. So I think we really do have our work cut out for us when it comes to how to help the teens. I have had a few teens absolutely love this idea, and that, like, one of the most important things I think with the teens is is that example I gave of giving the parents permission to just let the teen take care of themselves. Like stop, push, 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 and just pause. And parents in those situations usually need to take care of themselves too, because they're like frantic. They're like, oh my God, you have to do this, you have to do that. You're going to fail. You're going to be in repeat ninth grade. And, and so the parents need to take a minute so then they can think straight and then they can come back to their teen in a more compassionate way and not be quite so frantic. I think that whole thing with the teens, kind of all of a sudden they can see all of our, as parents and adults, they can see all of our flaws, you pulling the Wizard of Oz curtain aside and they can kind of see everything. I think we have to be really honest and real about how hard things are when you grow up and when you're a parent. It just doesn't suddenly get easier. And like, we're so focused on rules, which is one thing, like with all the, I appreciate all the rules around, the tobacco and everything, but I almost feel like rules then become a challenge for children, like for the teens. So like, well, I'm going to figure out how to break that one. And so I feel like if we can help them figure out how to support each other and build resilience. Sports are great, but like without the sports, there's so many kids that are struggling, who haven't been able to do their sports and communicate with their teams and their coaches. So I feel like we just need to help them expand that healthy piece of pie so that they have more things. And there's so many wonderful resources in Maine too, but it's just kind of pairing them up. And with COVID, so many things are like shut down or minimal numbers or hard to reach and hard to access. So hopefully we'll be able to work on that.
I think it's great that you did the data collection piece because I mean, sometimes things like this, you feel like it's like soft science, like, you're not at the lab doing, but to really promote it, having data is so critical. And so I know it just takes like, it almost takes twice as long when you start to do that, because you get into like, oh, my study design or like whatever, you start putting like stress on it and you're like, how am I going to measure this and stuff? But in the end, it's to like get it to be this broader initiative really needs data. And so I commend you for thinking about that from the very beginning and trying to get as much data as you can. This is a really cool project. And so thanks a lot for presenting it to us tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions, you guys?
Dr. Walsh chatted in that it was very incredibly interesting and inspiring, and she hopes someday you can publish a curriculum
Guide.
Can you, Gretchen, before you go, can you tell us how this is going to be different from what you're going to do on May 2nd? Because I
Yes.
think that's going to be a practical thing.
Right. So
Okay.
that's going to be more kind of breaking down and the actual things that you do and, kind of breaking down the anatomy of a meltdown and like what kinds of things that we can do to help families. So really taking it down to a granular level. And in that moment, what can you do? And, the parents like, you have to put him on medicine, or this is just a disaster, or I'm sending him. I had one that was like sending their disobedient teen to North Carolina for some sort of boot camp. I'm like, oh no, don't stop her sertraline. So, how can you help those families in those moments when it's just a complete mess? And so that I think that's where that's going to come into play. And then how you use different strategies like singing and stuff. I was thinking about starting with that wonderful video that went viral about the toddler melting down in Trader Joe's, and then everybody like singing, like, anyway, I have some ideas, and hopefully I'll be able to share some stories from specific families and specific scenarios from Resilience University too. So
It's great. I love everybody singing with that toddler. Okay, you guys. Well, thank you, Gretchen. Thank you once again. That was great. That was really great. And we will hopefully see you at the spring conference, because Gretchen has more in store for us. And we'll see hopefully folks next week. Thank you everyone for joining us.
thank you.
Thank you.